The big three automakers are not happy. They say a deal that charges lower tariffs on Japanese imports than on North American cars with high American content is a bad deal.
Trading problems between our nations, ideally by Labor Day.
He says it would be unreasonable for Canada to have an agreement that looks worse than the new U.S.-Japan deal that sees auto tariffs cut to 15% from 27.5%.
The United States has just signed a new trade agreement with Japan, slashing auto tariffs from 27.5% to 15%. On paper, it's a deal between Washington and Tokyo, but its impact has shaken Canada to the core. Why? Because every percentage point cut for Japan pushes Canadian-made cars further out of the U.S. market. Factories in Ontario are suddenly the expensive, less attractive choice. And yet, while Tokyo lobbied aggressively and secured this breakthrough, Ottawa stood still. Prime Minister Mark Carney keeps repeating promises of fair negotiations, but every day Canada's key industries are being squeezed harder, and people are losing patience. The numbers speak for themselves. With Japanese cars entering the U.S. at just 15% tariffs, Canadian exports are collapsing. In the second quarter of 2025 alone, auto exports to the U.S. dropped by over 30%. General Motors Canada reported a staggering 35% decline in quarterly profits, while Stellantis posted a $2.7 billion net loss in just the first half of the year.
Well, we want to compare ourselves to Japan. Japan buys approximately $79 billion worth of products off of the U.S. We buy $359 billion, so we're 400% more, even higher than that actually.
American lawmakers made it clear Japan earned its concessions through relentless diplomacy. Canada, meanwhile, didn't even make it to the negotiating table in time. Senior U.S. senators have openly said that Canada must prove it deserves equal treatment. For a country that once prided itself on being Washington's most trusted trade partner, this is a humiliation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose province is home to Canada's largest auto manufacturing plants, didn't hold back. "We can't sit here and watch factories slash jobs because our federal government failed to protect us. Why is Japan getting a better deal while we get ignored? This is a blatant diplomatic failure." Alberta's Danielle Smith echoed the anger. "We talk about Buy Canada, but without real policies to protect our industries, that slogan means nothing."
We should never take a backseat to anyone in the world, especially a backseat to President Trump. We're an economic powerhouse around the world, and again, we're their number one customer, and they need to start respecting their number one customer.
They're taking matters into their own hands. Ford is urging provinces to prioritize Canadian-made vehicles and cut down on imported U.S. parts. Alberta is bypassing Ottawa entirely, opening direct talks with American companies to sell oil and energy components. The anger isn't confined to political leaders. A Nanos research survey shows 64% of Canadians believe Ottawa has failed to defend national interests in trade talks. Social media is exploding with the hashtag #BuyCanada, but the tone is bitter. We're buying Canadian cars, but is Ottawa doing anything to protect Canadian jobs?
In response to U.S. tariffs and President Trump's threats to annex Canada, 71% of Canadian consumers say they intend to buy fewer American products this year.
Dealers have reported a 12% jump in Canadian-made car sales in the past month as ordinary citizens try to support local industries. But it's a desperate move, not a solution. If manufacturers keep cutting production lines and laying off workers, no grassroots campaign can save the sector. Mark Carney's assurances of ongoing negotiations sound hollow when factories are already cutting shifts. Reports from Washington suggest Canada might be forced to accept a tariff deal even worse than Japan's if it doesn't act quickly.
We'll be reinforcing those discussions over the next few days in Washington with the United States. We are looking for the best deal for Canada.
Doug Ford summarized the frustration bluntly in a recent press conference. "We're the U.S.'s biggest customer. We buy more American goods than Japan, China, and France combined. If we can't use that leverage to protect our own industries, then what exactly is Ottawa doing?" Every month of delay costs Canada jobs, revenue, and credibility. And while premiers push for real solutions, Ottawa appears bogged down in endless meetings and vague statements. Canadians don't need more speeches about working hard, they need results. Japan and the EU are signing favorable deals with the US, while Canada, the country with the deepest trade ties to America, is being left behind. Premiers can shout "Buy Canada" all they want, but without decisive federal action, those words will echo in vain. If Mark Carney keeps stalling, the real question won't be how many jobs Canada loses, it will be when Canada quietly becomes just another US-dependent economy. And by then, national pride will be nothing more than a memory.
Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff.
Of Canada's economy. Of course, the federal government is getting down to the wire in trade negotiations with the U.S.
And softwood may actually be one of those opportunities for us to strike an early deal with the Americans.
Trade talks between Canada and the United States have entered their most critical stage yet. With President Trump's August 1st deadline fast approaching, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made it clear, unless Canada opens its market, tariffs will hit. But Ottawa isn't folding. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now meeting with U.S. senators and provincial premiers to find a narrow path forward. A full rollback of tariffs is no longer expected. Instead, Canada is pushing for a limited sector-based deal, one that avoids broad economic damage and restores predictability, even if some tariffs remain.
They want to ensure that they're able to provide high-quality, low-cost building materials for Americans. Also, it's a recognition that in this reality that we're in with this president, we've got to put some things on the table to have conversation.
In the midst of this, one old issue is taking on new significance: softwood lumber. British Columbia has faced U.S. duties on softwood for years. But now, for the first time, Canadian officials, including Premier David Eby, are publicly signaling openness to export quotas as part of a deal. This marks a shift. Quotas were previously off the table, but with over $7 billion in softwood tariffs currently held in escrow and trade talks hanging by a thread, Canadian lumber is being positioned as a strategic bargaining chip, not just a casualty of U.S. protectionism. Why now? Because softwood could offer a rare, quick win. It's a sector with high visibility, cross-border interdependence, and enough political weight on both sides to create leverage, without touching more sensitive industries like dairy or autos.
Look, we got to be honest with ourselves as Canadians, and I think the Carney government has done a good job at this in its sort of early days. This is Trump's strategy, right? Exactly what you just described. That's what his sort of MO has been really in Trump 2.0 administration.
But the game Canada is playing is anything but straightforward. Trump's trade strategy has been deliberately chaotic, shifting deadlines, unclear demands, and threats of full renegotiation of USMCA in 2026. His pattern of destabilization forces other governments to react, not plan. Former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant, who once sat at the Premier's table, described Trump's approach as engineered confusion. And Canada, this time, is refusing to be baited. Carney's government isn't matching chaos with chaos. It's choosing discipline, listening to provinces, aligning federal priorities, and pursuing options outside the North American orbit. Canada's response is quiet but coordinated. Ontario defends its auto sector. British Columbia brings softwood to the table. Quebec wants time-bound clarity. Despite differences, premiers are presenting a united front. At the national level, Canada is reinforcing its foundation. Bill C-5 aims to break internal trade barriers. The major projects. Bill prioritizes infrastructure, energy, and mining, especially with Indigenous partnership. Externally, Canada is expanding its reach. From stronger ties with Mexico and the EU to renewed talks with G7 allies, the message is clear. Canada won't rely solely on Washington. Trump may still push forward with tariffs, but the cost is starting to show, not just for Canada, but for the U.S. as well. Softwood lumber duties have already raised construction costs across the U.S., particularly in housing markets dependent on Canadian imports. American lawmakers are under pressure. A bipartisan delegation of senators is now in Ottawa, not to threaten, but to preserve economic stability. And the longer the standoff continues, the more Canadian industries accelerate their pivot away from U.S. dependency. That's the paradox. The harder Trump pushes, the more self-reliant and strategic Canada becomes. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a stress test for policy, diplomacy, and national cohesion. Softwood lumber might not look like much, but in this moment, it represents something bigger. The ability of a country to hold its ground, make smart concessions, and defend its sovereignty without shouting. Trump's tariffs may yet land, but if they do, the blowback won't just be felt in Ottawa. It'll echo across American construction sites, congressional offices, and investor portfolios. And in the end, it may be Canada's quiet resolve, not Washington's volume, that shapes the deal.
Prime Minister Mark Carney will be at the summit tomorrow. Obviously, he'll be talking about trade with the U.S. What are you hoping to hear from him?
I'm hoping that we can all contribute to the path forward. That means the least tariffs, ideally no tariffs, as quickly as possible.
The headlines are loud. Tariffs are coming. August 1st is the deadline. Canada and the United States are scrambling to reach a new trade deal. Steel, autos, agriculture, they dominate every headline. But in the middle of this storm, something's missing from the conversation. Something big. Energy. Canada's most vital export to the U.S. And yet, it's barely being mentioned. No press briefings, no public threats, no leaks. And in a negotiation as high stakes as this one, that kind of silence is never accidental.
I think Donald Trump is feeling pretty cocky right now, full of himself. Thinks he's got everybody coming to him. I'm going to actually say Canada's imports of softwood lumber or steel or whatever are a national security threat, and I'm going to put more tariffs on. So,
as of now, most Canadian goods face a 25% tariff under the Trump administration's 2025 trade directive. On August 1st, that could rise to 35%. But energy, including oil, uranium, LNG, and hydropower, has stayed at 10%. It's one of the few categories that hasn't been pulled into the tariff crossfire. There's been no official announcement placing energy on or off the negotiating table. And yet, both countries are acting as if it's too sensitive to touch. For now. This silence is drawing attention because it suggests something deeper. Not that energy is off limits, but that it may be too valuable to risk in early talks. If this trade fight is a high-stakes game, then energy might just be the strongest card Canada holds. And that's exactly why it isn't being played. From Washington's side, touching Canadian energy too aggressively could backfire. The United States imports nearly 95% of its uranium, with Canada as its top secure supplier. That uranium feeds the country's nuclear reactors that are about to power a surge in AI-related data centers and clean energy grids. From Ottawa's side, making energy an early bargaining chip could invite dangerous demands. The Trump administration has already pushed for more access to Canada's telecom, banking, and agriculture sectors. Why give them a reason to ask for more? So instead of putting energy on the table, both sides are quietly leaving it just under it.
And then we're also looking to extend natural gas access into New Brunswick and support some of the assets that we have, like our LNG plant and our port in St. John that moves a lot of energy product. Mm-hmm. We also have critical mineral projects that contribute to Canada's defense.
While the federal government stays quiet, Canada's provinces are preparing the ground. In New Brunswick, Premier Susan Holt is pushing the Eastern Energy Partnership, a multilateral grid plan linking LNG, nuclear, and wind from Quebec to the Atlantic coast. St. John's Port is being upgraded, and new pipelines are under discussion to connect Western gas to Eastern export routes. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan is solidifying its role as a strategic uranium hub. Ontario is focusing on EV supply chains powered by domestic energy sources. None of these moves are explicitly linked to U.S. talks, but taken together, they form a clear pattern. Provinces are ensuring that if energy enters the trade equation, they'll be ready to use it on Canada's terms. Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to join Canada's premiers this week in Huntsville. The focus will be U.S. trade, and the political stakes couldn't be higher. But barring a breakthrough, it's unlikely the final deal will be free of tariffs. More likely is a partial agreement, one that accepts tariffs on sectors like steel or telecom, while keeping energy untouched. Not as a gift, but as a calculated exchange. And if there's no deal by August 1st, then energy will become even more critical, not in speeches, but in supply chains, export routes, and quiet retaliatory decisions. Because sometimes the most powerful card in a negotiation is the one you never show.